following is a tutorial on how to animate your character and do what we call a batch rendering. Right here I've got a skeleton with objects on it, and it's got a control rig on it already, so I will be animating some of the control points here in red to move my character utilizing this timeline down below. You'll see in the timeline we've got 200 frames total, so if we're doing 30 frames per second at 200 frames, it's going to be a little over 6 seconds long, which is fine for our project. I wouldn't want it really any longer, so I just want some slight movements for your character animation. The 120, it's just telling us that we're seeing 120 frames of the timeline, so you can always change that out too, but the important number is the 200. The most important thing right now is to create a folder or use the same folder right now that your character is located in, and we need to add some additional folders to your directory. And the way you do it is in Maya. If you go to File, Project Window, you'll see there are several folders here that will be placed into your existing directory. You will need to go to hit the new button and give a name. I call this one Mic Test, and then the location will be the directory where your current character is located. So you'll hit the folder to go search for that. And then once you hit accept, all these folders will be placed in your directory. The most important one will be the images folder. Every frame that is rendered with your animation, every single frame will be located in that folder. So if you have 200 frames, you will have 200 images in this folder. So then you would just hit accept. Next thing would be to work with your control points and start placing keyframes in along your timeline. Remember, a keyframe is a change in one's property over time. So you need to set keyframes, move your playback head out over so many frames, and then place another keyframe in. So I'm going to start at frame 1 here. Over to the lower right, there's a little icon here, and if you enable that, we'll be setting up what is called auto keyframe, which is probably the best way to keyframe your animation at this point. To get started, you select the control point on your character and then hit the S key. Grab the control point, hit the S key, and you'll see in red on your timeline a keyframe has been inserted. The next step would be to go out over time. I'll go out to 60 frames, and then all I need to do is, I don't have to hit S again, all I have to do is just move my control point here using the arrows or these squares, and it will automatically put a keyframe in for me. So if I scrub, this is called scrubbing, I'm left clicking and dragging, you'll see I can see the animation that I've got. I can also use the playback controls here, hit rewind and hit play and watch it move. Now right now I've got 60 frames, so if we're animating at 30 frames per second, that's 2 seconds total of animation. So I could still continue out to maybe frame 90 here, just left clicking and dragging along the timeline and then moving my arm back a little bit using this control point, and it automatically puts a keyframe in again based on this enabled icon. So now if I use my playback, rewind and play, you'll see it come in and then back. Now if I move my playback head back to the beginning, left click and drag, and I click on my waist control point, you'll see there are no keyframes here. If I click back up to the wrist, there are the keyframes. For each control point, it will have and should have its own timeline. So if I grab the waist control point and I start again by hitting the S key, it puts in the keyframe. I move out, maybe I only want it to go down for a couple or for a second. I drag it down, puts a keyframe in, and then maybe out to frame 60. I pull them back up, and then maybe frame 90, he kind of goes back down. So if I rewind and play, you'll see I've got 4 keyframes there for the waist, And then if I hit my wrist control point, you see I have 3 keyframes. So if you want to adjust your keyframes, you just need to shift click on that keyframe and then left click and drag the arrows to move your keyframe left or right. And by doing that, that's going to increase or decrease the speed of your animation. So once you've got your 6 to 10 second animation set up and ready to go, and you've got a few different types of keyframes going for the control points, it's time to what we call batch render. You need to be in the rendering pull down menu here, and we are going to go to render, batch render. So let's just click on that square right here, and this is where we'll start batch rendering. But before we do that, we need to go into the, so I'm going to close this out, go into the render settings. And the most important part here is we can, render in any of these types of renders, but we'll use mental ray. So under common, under mental ray, the most important thing is to set up what we call frame animation extension. So if I click this right now, if I were to select these first two, it would just render a single frame, kind of like what we've been doing anyways. But as soon as we have a pound sign, what it's going to do is render each frame 1 through 200 and name it properly. So I could come down here to name underscore pound or hashtag dot extension, select that, and a few more things become available to us. And one of those is the start frame at 1 and the end frame at 10. However, we have 200 frames to work with. And then we could render our perspective, which we have been doing, or if you did put a camera in, we could do that as well. Now, finally, the final image format that you'd want to use, I would suggest PNG or JPEG. If you want a flattened image with a background color, you would save it as a JPEG image. If you want to bring along what we call an alpha channel or a transparency, you would set it to PNG. So what it's going to be is a name, a number, and then the .png extension to it. So let's finally just give it a name. We'll call it robot1. So it'll be called robot1_1.png. The next frame will be robot_2.png. That's how it'll render out. It'll render out all 200 frames here. So once that's set up, I'll close out that render. Now we can go to render batch render and then just hit continue. And you'll see down here it says result rendering with mental ray down here in the lower part below your timeline. So it takes time for it to think through everything, and then once it's set, it'll start rendering through all your different frames. You can see it 1, 2, 3, etc.